My name is Tatum and I am 29 years old. I drove 4.5 hours from Nashville to my grandmother's farmhouse in Clarksville the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and I expected two things: her cast iron biscuits still warm from the oven, and the particular smell of cedar and old wool that has lived in that house since I was small enough to fit in the kitchen windowsill. Instead, I pulled into the gravel driveway and found every light in the house dark, a folded note propped against the salt shaker on the kitchen table, and my grandmother sitting alone in her rocking chair in the corner of the living room. They had told me she barely knew her own name anymore. Within 5 days, I would learn she knew a great deal more than that. And by the time my mother and brother came home from their resort in Scottsdale, the locks on this house were changed, and a federal marshal was waiting in the gravel driveway. Before I tell you what happened, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and hit that like button if you have ever been the person your family left behind to deal with the mess they made. I work as an estate planning and probate attorney in Nashville. I spent 3 years in law school on student loans, passed the bar on my first attempt, and built a small but solid practice helping families protect what they spent their lives building: wills, trusts, powers of attorney, guardianships, the machinery that keeps a family's legacy from falling into the wrong hands. To my mother, Renee, this was the most boring work imaginable. She would wave her hand at dinner whenever I mentioned a client and say something like, "Oh, you and your paperwork. Your brother Preston is out there actually making things happen." Preston was 34 and worked in real estate. Though worked is generous. He had a license, a nice truck, and an ability to talk his way into rooms where serious people were making decisions. He had sold maybe 4 properties in 3 years. My mother treated him like he was closing deals on skyscrapers. I had learned not to argue about it. The drive up to Clarksville that Wednesday was gray and cold, the kind of Tennessee November that makes the whole sky look like a sheet of old tin. I stopped at a gas station outside of Ashland City and bought a box of chocolate pecan turtles for my grandmother, because she had loved them her whole life, and because I was hoping she would remember that. The family said the decline had started 8 months ago, after a bad fall in her backyard, confusion, memory gaps, difficulty following conversations. My mother had taken charge, as she always did, and arranged for a home health aide during the week. She said the holidays were too stressful for someone in my grandmother's condition, which was why they had decided on a quiet family trip to a resort outside of Scottsdale, instead of the usual Thanksgiving at the farmhouse. I had not been told about the trip until 4 days before I drove up. A single text from my mother: "Tatum, we're taking a little trip for Thanksgiving. Go check on Grandma Helene, would you? 8 has the week off. Leave the thermostat 62. That house costs a fortune to heat." I read that text 3 times in the parking lot of my office. Then I got in my car and drove north. The farmhouse sat at the end of a long gravel road lined with oak trees that had lost their leaves weeks ago. My grandmother Helene had lived on this property for 51 years. She and my late grandfather had started with 30 acres and a farmhouse that needed a new roof, and over decades they had accumulated 6 rental properties scattered across 2 counties, a storage facility on the edge of town, and enough land that 3 different developers had knocked on the front door in the past 10 years. She had turned them all away. "This land stays in this family," she had told my mother once, right in front of me, when I was maybe 12. My mother had smiled and said, "Of course, Mama, of course it does." The gravel crunched under my tires. The oak trees stood bare on both sides of the road. Every window in the farmhouse was dark. I let myself in with the spare key I had carried on my keychain since college. The front door opened into the narrow entryway that smelled exactly like I remembered: cedar and old wool, and faintly of the rosemary she kept in a pot on the kitchen sill. But the house was cold, not chilly in November cold. Cold like a house that had been set to the lowest possible temperature by someone who was not planning to come back anytime soon. I could see my breath in the hallway. The note was on the kitchen table, folded once, written in my mother's handwriting on the back of a grocery receipt. It said, "Helene's meds are in the cabinet above the microwave. Morning pill is the small white one. She has good days and bad days. Don't upset her with complicated conversations. Make sure she eats. We'll be back Sunday, R." No Tatum, no thank you. No acknowledgement that I had just driven 4.5 hours through a gray November afternoon, To spend Thanksgiving in a cold house with a woman my family had written off as a burden. I stood in that kitchen for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a crow made a sound in one of the bare oaks. I put the note back on the table, found the medication cabinet, and took out the small amber bottles lined up inside. Then I walked toward the living room to find my grandmother. She was in her rocking chair near the window. The chair faced the driveway, which I noticed later was not an accident. I could see the silhouette of her white hair over the back of it. I came around the side slowly, the way you learn to move around someone who startles easily, and I held the small medicine bottle in one hand and prepared myself for the particular kind of grief that comes from looking into the eyes of someone you love and not finding them home. She heard my footsteps and turned her head. Her eyes were clear. Not confused but trying clear, not recognition flickering at the edges clear. I mean sharp, fully present. The same dark eyes that used to catch me sneaking second helpings of cornbread at the age of 8 and make me feel thoroughly known. She looked past me toward the dark hallway, checking that I was alone. Then she settled back in the chair with a long, quiet exhale and said, in a voice I had not heard in 8 months, steady and low and completely herself, "Did they actually go?" I dropped the medicine bottle. It hit the hardwood floor and bounced under the coffee table, and I did not move to pick it up. I just stood there looking at my grandmother, who was sitting with her spine straight and her chin level and absolutely no fog anywhere behind her eyes. "Grandma Helene," I said, my voice came out wrong. You know who I am." She gave me a look I recognized from childhood, the one that meant she found the question a little bit beneath both of us. "Of course I know who you are. Sit down, sweetheart. We don't have a lot of time and I need to show you some things." I sat. She told me everything. 8 months ago when she had the fall, and yes, the fall was real, she had slipped on the back steps in the rain and bruised her hip badly. She noticed something in the weeks that followed. Small things at first, mail she had not received. A call from one of her rental tenants asking about a change in the payment address that she had never authorized. A statement from her bank that showed a transfer she could not account for. She had confronted my mother about the transfer, and my mother had been dismissive in a way that felt practiced. "Just a bookkeeping issue, Mama. Don't worry yourself, you need to rest." So she started watching. She had spent 50 years managing her own finances and her own affairs, and she knew the difference between a bookkeeping issue and something else entirely. What she did not know was how far it had gone, or who she could trust, or whether her own son-in-law and her own daughter were going to try to declare her legally incompetent the moment she pushed back. She knew that happened to people. She had read about it. She had seen it in her own church community, a woman whose children had used her mild forgetfulness as an excuse to seize control of everything she owned. So she made a decision. She started seeming more confused than she was, more scattered, slower to respond. She let my mother take over her calendar. She stopped asking questions about the finances. She let them believe the fall had taken something from her that it had not. She did it, she told me, because she needed to see the whole picture before she acted, and because she was waiting for me. "You're the only one in this family who knows what these documents actually mean," she said. She reached into the drawer of the side table and pulled out a manila envelope. Her hands were steady. "I've been collecting what I could, but I can't do the rest of it myself. I need a lawyer. I need you." She had kept copies of everything she could quietly photograph with the cell phone my granddaughter. That's me. That's what she called me. Her granddaughter had helped her set up 2 years ago. Bank statements. A letter from the title company about a property she did not recognize listing. And a copy of a notarized general power of attorney that bore her signature and had been filed with the county clerk's office 7 months ago. I opened that envelope and the room got very quiet around me. The POA was clean on the surface, proper format, notary stamp, county filing. It granted my mother Renee full authority to act on my grandmother's behalf in all financial and legal matters. I have drafted dozens of these documents for clients. I know what a valid one looks like. I also know what it looks like when the person signing one does not fully understand what they are giving away. But that was not what stopped my breath. What stopped it was the signature. I have seen my grandmother's handwriting my entire life. Grocery lists on the back of church bulletins, birthday cards with her particular looping H and the way she always underlined her name once. The signature on the POE used the right letters in the right order, but the pressure was wrong. The H did not loop. The pen had moved carefully, slowly, the way a person moves when they are copying something rather than simply signing. This document was not signed by my grandmother. I pulled out my phone and started taking photographs of every page. "What else have you noticed?" I asked, keeping my voice level the way I do in client meetings when I am learning something terrible and need the person across from me to keep talking. She told me about the rental properties. 3 of them had been listed for sale in the past 6 months. 2 had already closed. She showed me screenshots she had taken of the listings, saved quietly to a folder on her phone labeled recipes. 2 properties she had owned for 20 years, generating steady income that had always gone into her account, sold under the authority of a power of attorney she had never signed. She did not know what the proceeds had gone to. She only knew they had not come to her. And then she showed me the last thing. The farmhouse, the property we were sitting in, the one she had told my mother would stay in this family. There was a listing agreement. A buyer had been found. A closing was scheduled for that Monday, 4 days away. I set down the papers and looked at my grandmother for a long moment. Outside the window, the last of the afternoon light was going pale over the empty fields. "Who's the closing agent?" I asked. She told me. I knew the title company. They were legitimate, which meant they were also operating in good faith, believing the POA they had been presented was valid. If I could not reach them with a legal challenge before Monday morning, that deed would transfer. "Grandma," I said, "I'm going to need you to tell me everything you remember, every date, every name, every document you've seen. We're going to stop this." She reached out and put her hand on top of mine. Her grip was firm. "I know you are," she said. "That's why I've been waiting." We had been working for maybe 90 minutes, my laptop open on the kitchen table, with every document she's saved to her phone, now organized into a single folder, when my cell phone rang. I looked at the screen. "Preston." My grandmother glanced at it and said, without missing a beat, "Put it on speaker." I answered. He did not say hello, he did not ask how she was doing, did not mention Thanksgiving, did not acknowledge that I was sitting in a cold farmhouse because he had decided to spend the holiday at a resort. His voice came through the phone with the particular energy of someone who has had 2 drinks by the pool and considers that a valid excuse for anything. "Hey, I need you to do something for me," he said. "My card got flagged for some reason, probably a fraud alert from the foreign transaction fees or whatever, and I need some cash moved. Just go into Grandma's desk in the den, the middle drawer, she keeps her checkbook in there, and write a check from her account to my Venmo, and then photograph the check and send it to me. It's about $3,000. I looked at my grandmother. She was watching the phone on the table with an expression I can only describe as confirmation. $3,000 from a woman he believed did not know what month it was, for his resort expenses, 4 days before he closed the sale of her home. "I'm not doing that, Preston," I said. A pause, then his voice shifted, that familiar gear change from casual to annoyed. "Tatum, come on, this is not a big deal. She doesn't even use that account for anything anymore. It's basically just sitting there. Just do it." "No." "Why are you being like this? It's $3,000, not $3 million. "Because it's her money," I said, "and you don't have the right to it." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his tone was something else, something harder. "You want to be careful here, okay? I'm telling you as your brother. This whole setup, her being there, you playing the concerned granddaughter, it looks a certain way. And I'm going to make sure Mom knows that you were difficult about this, and that you've been going through things you don't have any business touching. You don't have any authority here." "I do. We have POA." I looked at that forged signature on the document in front of me. "I know you do," I said. "Have a good Thanksgiving, Preston. We'll talk when you get home." I hung up. My grandmother picked up her mug of coffee from the side table and took a slow sip. She did not look surprised. She did not look frightened. She looked like a woman who had been waiting 8 months to confirm exactly what she already knew, and had now confirmed it. "He's going to panic," she said. "Good," I said and turned back to my laptop. I worked through the night. My grandmother went to bed around 10, and I sat at her kitchen table under the overhead light, with every document spread out and photographed and organized, building the strongest possible record of what had been done and how. The fraudulent POA. The 2 completed property sales, with proceeds that never reached her account. The listing agreement for the farmhouse, signed under that same forged authority. The paper trail was not hidden with any sophistication. It was hidden the way people hide things when they believe the person they are hiding it from is no longer capable of looking. Arrogance is a poor filing system. By midnight, I had a complete evidentiary file. I emailed it to myself, backed it up to cloud storage, and then I called the only probate attorney I knew personally, who was senior enough and angry enough about elder financial abuse to answer his phone on Thanksgiving week. His name was Clifford, and he had been practicing estate law in Tennessee for 37 years, and when I explained what I had, a forged power of attorney, 2 fraudulent property transfers, and a home sale 4 days from closing, he was quiet for a moment and then said, "Get me everything in writing and I'll call Judge Marlowe's clerk in the morning." Emergency injunctions are exactly what they're for. Clifford filed the emergency motion at 8 o'clock Thursday morning. I provided the supporting documentation, the signature analysis I had done side by side with verified historical samples of my grandmother's handwriting, the bank records showing proceeds from the 2 sold properties routed to an account in my mother's name, and a sworn affidavit from my grandmother herself, lucid and detailed and dated, describing every step of what she had observed over the past 8 months. Judge Marlowe reviewed the filing personally. By 11 that morning, she signed the order. The title company received it by noon. The closing scheduled for Monday was halted. Every transfer made under the fraudulent POA was flagged for investigation. My mother's access to my grandmother's financial accounts was frozen pending the outcome of a formal hearing. We spent Thanksgiving quietly. My grandmother made the biscuits after all. We ate at the kitchen table with the manila folder set to the side and the laptop closed, and she told me stories about my grandfather I had never heard. The early years, the first property they bought together, the way he used to argue with every contractor they hired, and then become close friends with all of them by the end of the job. I sat across from her and thought about how close it had come, how close they had gotten to taking all of it. Sunday came. My grandmother and I were in the front sitting room when the rental car turned onto the gravel road. I had arranged everything with Clifford the day before. The new locks had been installed Saturday morning. The documentation had been in federal hands since Friday, when Clifford's contact at the FBI's Elder Fraud Unit made contact and confirmed they were already aware of the title company's report. My mother was out of the car first, tan in the way people get tan at southwestern resorts in November, wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than my first month's rent in law school. Preston came out after, stretching, looking at the house with the expression of someone who owns something. My father Vernon trailed behind, carrying most of the luggage the way he had trailed behind my mother their entire marriage, quiet and peripheral, and ultimately not paying close enough attention to the things that should have mattered. My mother tried her key. She tried it twice, then stood looking at it, then looked at the door, then tried it again with more force, as if the lock were being difficult rather than simply changed. Preston came up the steps. He tried his own key, pulled it out, stared at the keypad that had replaced the old hardware, and then looked up at the front windows the way you look when you want someone to explain something to you. I opened the door. My mother's face went through several expressions in quick succession: relief, irritation, something else underneath both. "Tatum, why on earth is the lock changed? Open the gate, we're exhausted." She reached for the handle as if I would simply step aside. I did not step aside. "You're not coming in," I said. My voice was even. "This property has been placed under a court order pending the outcome of a fraud investigation. You don't have legal authority to enter." My mother let out a laugh that was not a laugh. "That is the most dramatic thing I have ever heard you say. Move. The power of attorney you filed with the county clerk 7 months ago is fraudulent," I said. "Grandma Helene did not sign it." An emergency injunction was granted Thursday. The property closing you scheduled for Monday has been permanently halted, and the 2 properties you sold and pocketed the proceeds from are part of an active federal investigation. Nobody moved for a moment. Preston was the one who recovered first, which I suppose I should have expected. He came up 2 more steps and pointed at me the way he used to point at me when we were children, and he was trying to establish authority he did not have. "You have absolutely no idea what you've done," he said. "You have just blown up our family over some misunderstanding about paperwork, and I promise you, when our lawyers get involved." "Call them," I said. "I'd recommend it." It was my grandmother who ended the standoff. She appeared in the doorway beside me, standing straight, wearing her cardigan and her reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she looked at her daughter and her grandson with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not angry. Something quieter than anger and more final. "Renee," she said, "I heard every conversation you had in this house for 8 months. You are not as quiet as you think you are." My mother opened her mouth, nothing came out. The federal vehicle came up the gravel road 2 minutes later. 2 agents and 1 county deputy, who had been parked at the end of the road since 9 that morning. Preston saw them first, and his face did something complicated that I do not have a word for, the specific expression of a person who has been confidently walking in a direction they were certain was forward and has just discovered they have walked off a ledge. He turned to me with something that might have started as a threat and came out as desperation. "Tatum, tell them there's been a misunderstanding. You can walk this back, we're family." I looked at him standing on those porch steps, the house behind me that he had signed away without a thought, the 2 properties already gone, the money already spent on whatever it had been spent on. And I thought about every dinner table where my mother had interrupted me to redirect the conversation to something Preston was doing. Every holiday where my legal career had been described to relatives as something I did to keep busy. Every time my grandmother's name had come up, and my mother's voice had taken on that particular tone of charitable exhaustion. "I know we're family," I said. "I hope you find a good attorney." The agents were professional and efficient, in the way that federal agents are when a case has already been built for them, and their job is primarily logistical. My mother did not make a scene the way I might have expected. She went pale and stayed pale and complied with everything asked of her, her sunglasses still on her face, her resort tan suddenly looking very strange in the gray Tennessee afternoon. Preston argued for about 90 seconds and then stopped arguing. My father Vernon stood by the rental car the entire time, his hands in his pockets, watching. He had not been named in the filing. I do not know what he knew or when he knew it, and that is a question I have left to people with more information than I have. My grandmother watched from the doorway until the vehicle had gone down the gravel road, and the sound of tires on stone had faded entirely. Then she turned and went back inside to make coffee. I stood on the porch alone for a moment, looking at the bare oaks along the driveway, the gray sky behind them, the fields that had been in my grandmother's name for 51 years. Then I went inside, too. The legal process that followed was not quick, but it was thorough. The fraudulent POA was invalidated within 2 weeks of the initial filing. The 2 completed property sales were litigated through civil proceedings. One was successfully unwound because the buyer had been alerted to the contested title before close of escrow and agreed to rescind. The second required a settlement, and the funds recovered were returned to my grandmother's estate. The federal elder financial exploitation charges carried more weight than Preston had anticipated when he was planning all of this from a resort pool in Scottsdale, and the combination of the forged notarized document, the fraudulent property transfers, and the recorded evidence of my grandmother's own documentation made the case straightforward in a way that did not leave much room for the kind of creative legal maneuvering he had been counting on. My mother received 30 months, Preston received 4 years. The distinction reflected the difference between organizing a fraud and executing it, and the judge in sentencing made specific note of the deliberate and sustained nature of the exploitation. My grandmother and I sat together in the courtroom for the sentencing hearing. She wore her good navy dress and the pearl earrings she saved for occasions. She looked at both of them with the same expression she had worn on the porch. Not angry. Final. Afterward, in the parking lot, I asked her if she was okay. She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. "I'm sad," she said. "I'll probably be sad about it for the rest of my life, but I'm not surprised. I think I stopped being surprised about 7 months ago. She squeezed my hand once and then let go. 6 months after the sentencing, I drove back up to Clarksville on a Saturday morning in May, when the oaks along the driveway had their leaves back and the fields were green from a wet spring. My grandmother met me at the door in her gardening clothes, dirt on her gloves, looking more like herself than she had in years. We sat on the back porch with iced tea and went through the new estate documents together, a revocable living trust I had drafted to protect the farmhouse and the remaining properties, with successor provisions and independent trustee authority that would make it far harder for anyone to do what had been done again. She signed everything carefully, in her own handwriting, with her own particular looping H. I filed the documents the following week. On my drive back to Nashville, I thought about the night I had arrived in that cold, dark house with a box of pecan turtles and a key on my keychain, expecting biscuits and old wool, and finding instead something that needed fighting for. I thought about how my mother had spent 20 years treating my legal career as something I did with paperwork in a quiet room where nothing real was happening. I thought about the morning the judge signed the emergency injunction, the title company clerk's voice on the phone, confirming the closing was halted, the specific quality of relief that does not feel like triumph, but like something finally being set level after years of being off. Your worth is never established by the people who spend the most time diminishing it. I know that now in a way I did not know it before that November, though maybe I should have known it sooner. What I also know is this. The skills that were dismissed as boring paperwork turned out to be the only thing standing between my grandmother's life's work and the people she trusted with it. Sometimes the right person is the one they forgot to worry about. Sometimes the one they left behind is the one holding the key. If you have ever had to protect someone you love from the people who were supposed to be protecting them, I want to hear about it in the comments below. Please like and subscribe for more stories about standing your ground when it matters most. Thank you for being here.